Hi there, Clelia from LlamaIndex here, and today we're going to vibe code a LlamaIndex workflow using Claude Code, Claude.md, and Claude Skills. And once we've vibe coded the LlamaIndex workflow, we're going to package it as a Llama agent and deploy it to the cloud. So let's start by creating a directory called Financial Documents Classification. And once we created this directory, we're going to initialize it as a UV project. And we're going to remove the main.py file since we do not need it. And we're going to add vibe-llama as our go-to tool to download agent-compatible, agent-specific documentation. So we're activating our virtual environment and we're going to run vibe-llama starter to get started with our documentation, with downloading the documentation that we need. So vibe-llama starter, as you can see here, allows us to choose Claude Code and then Llama Cloud Services, LlamaIndex Workflows, and Llama Deploy. And we can choose also, since we chose Claude, we can choose the skills. We're going to choose text classification and LlamaCTL usage for this one, and we're going to download everything in our terminal. So now that we are here, we can list our directory. We see that Claude.md.claude directory has been created. We can go to .claude and we can see that skills have been created, and we can see what skills have been created, specifically LlamaCTL and text classification, the two skills that we requested. So now we can go back and we can start chatting with Claude. And so we start chatting with Claude. We say that we trust this folder, and let's start with Claude. So we would say, we start by saying, Claude, this is a UV project. Okay, and we would like basically to create a LlamaIndex workflow starting from documentation and skills that are available to Claude. So let's create this prompt that I just started typing here to ask Claude not only for this, but basically for a workflow that performs, as I said, text classification, because we gave Claude this the skill, and classification for financial documents. We want a cash flow statement, we want a income statement, and we want balance sheet. So these are the three types of documents that Claude will be classifying, like that our workflow will be classifying for us. And so we want these to be, I would say, PDFs, like these files to be PDFs, and we want to start from the file paths. So the workflow, first of all, this is a very important thing. The workflow has to be straightforward and to all include the classification. So we don't want Claude to perform or to derail and perform, for example, text extraction or parsing, as they might be, actually as they are, within the, I would say, within the documentation. So we just want to include classification and no other third-party tool / I would say service. So now that we have this tool, we want the code to be concise, if we might, and not only concise, we want it to be just the workflow. So we want Claude to provide just the workflow and not like other things, for example, like argument parsers or stuff that would make the workflow, for example, a CLI tool, because we only want a workflow in order to deploy through Llama agents. And so now we start the task with Claude. So this will take a moment. So we'll see each other back when Claude has finished. So now Claude is asking me to use the classify skill, which I agree to. And as you can see now, is creating the concise workflow for financial document classification. Here is the workflow. I take a look at the workflow. It's okay. So we can say, yes, this is good to go. So now Claude will create our workflow as a financial classifier workflow.py. So this is basically set, and it will tell us, okay, now set your Llama Cloud API key and run it through the main, run it through a synchronous main function. So that's all. That's basically what we need to do for now. So let's now take a look at the workflow that Claude has produced for us. So this workflow is composed by two steps, which each of which takes an input event and produces an event. Specifically, we have the first step that takes a start event, which is the base class for every start event, so we do not subclass the start event here, and produces a classify event, which is defined up here as having the results attribute as a list of classification result, which is basically a model that represents a result from a document classification as produced by Llama Classify, and the classifier then triggers a second step, which produces in turn a stop event, which has a default attribute as result. And within this result, we pass the result coming from the classified documents step. The classified document steps takes basically the file paths that we are supposed to provide from the start event, okay, and it will basically from the start event, and it will basically classify these file paths one by one and append the result to this list. What is very interesting to notice here is that Claude, instead of using resources, uses another pattern that you can build your workflows with, which is the initialization pattern. So basically, workflows being classes can use attributes, can use internal and externally available attributes. And in this case, Claude initializes the workflows with two important attributes, which are the classifier. It's basically a wrapper around the Llama Classifier client, and the rules, which are the classifier rules that we asked for, so the cash flow statement, the income statement, and the balance sheet. So now we have our workflow, which is a financial document classifier with a timeout of 300 seconds, which is approximately 5 minutes, and we can run this workflow. And so basically what we do is define a main function in which the workflow runs, and a synchronous main function in which the workflow runs, and we provide file paths directly as a keyword argument to the run method here. So file paths are referring to two files, the cash flow statement and the balance sheet that we have here, which are just two sample cash flow statements and balance sheet, and we return the result, which will be basically the list of classification results. We run the main function and we print for each result. Basically we print the classification. So now, upon exporting our Llama Cloud API key, because as you can see here, the Llama Cloud API key is required, we can run our financial classifier workflow just by typing the run financial classifier workflow.py. And as you can see here, we have our results. We have cash flow statement. We have document type is cash flow statement. The confidence is 1.0, which is basically 100%. And basically it says, oh, well, the document is titled sample cash flow statement, a statement of cash flows. So that is basically it. The second document has been classified correctly as balance sheet with a confidence also here of 100%. And the reasoning is that, yeah, well, basically the document is typed balance sheet and is structured to show assets, liabilities, equity at a specific point in time. So that's basically the definition of balance sheet as defined by our rules. So that's mostly it. So as you can see, Claude has created a functional workflow that can perform financial document instructions. So now what we're going to do is that we're going to ask Claude to create a Llama deployer, even better, a Llama agent, help us serve it locally first, and then deploy it to the cloud second. So now that we took a look at the workflow, we can ask Claude to prepare the workflow, basically to be packaged as a Llama agent and to be deployed first locally and then to the cloud. Let's get started. And we start by obviously opening our Claude, and we ask if it can move the financial document classification project, the financial document classification workflow, to a, I would say, Python package-like structure. So this Python package-like structure generally is represented by, I would say, an SRC, something like that, as something like SRC financial document classification or something. That will be, I would say, of help when we then decide to deploy the workflow. So we now ask Claude to move all of these, so it will take a little bit of time. So as you can see now, Claude is creating basically a lot of files, has read our byproject.ml, has created a models file, and has created an events file, and is basically creating a workflow file in which we will store our workflow. And finally, it's creating an init file so that we will have a proper package structure, I would say proper package configuration for a Python package. And now obviously we have our init.py file that is fine and that we can approve. And now what is very interesting here is that obviously Claude has access to Llama deploy documentation and has access basically to Llama setl usage through its skill. So as you can see here, Claude autonomously without me asking is taking the lead and saying, okay, let's add also a llama deploy configuration to run the tool through a llama-ctl to the llama-ctl CLI. So we create a llama deploy tool.llama deploy field in the PyProject.oml, and we create tool.llama deploy.workflows pointing to our workflow. So then we remove obviously the old file that we used before, that we tested before, and we should be good to go. And yeah, as you can see here, it creates a little bit of a documentation for us to use this workflow and say, okay, so use llama-ctl serve and then serve the workflow through deployments financial classifier workflow classifier run. So what I also need here is that it creates a configuration for llama deploy CLI to basically deploy to the cloud. We're going to use it later, but let's do it here. Let's do it right now, since Claude is already, I would say, on a good strike. And as you can see, it's creating the configuration. It's creating also .env.example, because obviously we need environment variables such as our Llama Cloud, our Llama Cloud API key. And we can say, yes, this PyProject.oml is fine, and we can go with this. So now also Claude has created a readme.md file, which we can take a look at. It's a very big readme.md file. We give the permission to write this readme.md file with all the documentation, and that's basically all we need. And so we can just now close this first, I would say, llama-ctl configuration session with this last I would say instructions by Claude that tells us how to use everything. So let's now take a look at what Claude has produced for us. We already had a peek during the coding session from the terminal, but let's now have a better look. So Claude has added to our PyProject.oml, as it is expected to do, a llama deploy specification. Specifically, it created a llama deploy project, which we call Llama Agent, which is a financial classifier, and it added a workflow to this financial classifier, which is a classify workflow, which comes directly from the financial document classification package, Python package, from the workflow module with the workflow variable. So it has basically done what it is supposed to do. And obviously it created, as we saw earlier, it created an events file, it created a models file, and it created a workflow file. So what we now have to do is basically follow the instructions by Claude and basically install the dependencies. We already did that. Set up the environment variable. So we create a .env file. So we don't use a .env.example, but we create a .env file with a Llama Cloud API key. And then what we do is we go and serve our workflow locally. And actually we can make Claude do this because, as you remember, Claude has this llama-ctl skill, which basically can help it understand what tools to use when and how to use basically llama-ctl. And yeah, in this case we can try with, for example, this card command when the workflow is served, and we could also, I would say, deploy through cloud. So let's first of all install llama-ctl. So we will go into uv tool install llama-ctl. And as you can see, we installed one executable, llama-ctl, and now we can basically go and make Claude take care of the whole deployment. But first of all, we can, I would say, we should create a GitHub repository. So we should add, commit our changes, and we should change the name of the branch. And we should push all our changes to a repository. So we could create this. We can say financial document classification llama agent. We can set visibility to public. We can add a remote. We can call the remote origin, and we can push all the changes to origin. So we now have all our changes pushed to origin, and basically this will be the base for our deployment. But we're not deploying yet. First of all, we're asking Claude to help us serve the workflow locally and to help us send a request to the workflow locally, and then we're going to deploy the workflow on cloud again through Claude. So now that we took a look at Claude's work, we can try to make Claude serve our workflow locally. So as you can see, Claude is, we ask Claude if it can please start serving the workflow locally through our llama deploy CLI tool, which is llama-ctl. And what happens here is that Claude is ruminating, I would say, and it will take a look at the project structure. And then once the project structure is clear and perfect, I would say to Claude, it will start llama-ctl serve, and that's exactly what we do. And it will, I would say, check if the command is doing well, is deploying. So now what happens here is that after Claude checked a couple of times, the server has been failing. And so what happens is that presumably there is something missing. And what is missing is a build system configuration, which is normally you include in a project.yml to build the Python package. And Claude did not do it at first. And so here we are. Claude now has added the build configuration, the build system configuration, and now restarted the workflow. And what happens here is now that the workflow is working. So I would say better restarted the server, the workflow server. And what happens here is that now the workflow is serving. So I can see that the package is being built and installed. And yeah, that is great. The workflow is now, I would say, running. So we ask for a curl request to the deployments financial classifier workflow name run endpoint. Specifically, obviously the base URL is 127.0.0.1 with port 501. And the name of the workflow, as we know, is classify because we saw it earlier. And so we ask Claude to create this curl request that will help us run the workflow. So now Claude has produced our curl request and it also some Python code to mimic also this curl request. So this is great. We do not need to do anything else and we can test the curl request separately. So now, last but not least, what we're going to do is we're going to use Claude to, I would say, basically, we're going to use Claude to basically deploy our workflow. And so we're going to run Claude, as always, and basically, we're going to ask if it can create or better help us deploy the workflow to the cloud, obviously, because now we already have tested it and so that Claude successfully deployed it and served it locally as a server. And now we're asking to use llama-ctl deployments to create and better to I would say, yeah, to create a deployment, to push the deployment to the cloud. Now Claude is telling us, okay, that there's probably a local database that you don't want to be pushed to the cloud, so let's keep it into the git ignore. That's fine. We will put it into the git ignore and push, and I can say commit and push the changes to GitHub. And now presumably we will. I would say now presumably we will deploy the workflow using llama-ctl deployments. And as you can see, Claude says, okay, let's run llama-ctl deployments, great. But this command requires an interactive session. And so Claude will now say, okay, now let's see if we can do it non-interactively. But presumably, or better, in this case, you cannot. And so it's a little bit derailing here. It's asking me for the status, for the out status. And so I'm saying, okay, if you do not create a deployment on your own, then let's say you tell me how to do it. And I will do it in an interactive terminal session. So now I will ask Claude what to do. How can I create a llama-ctl deployment? And Claude will produce, presumably, an answer with the same command that it used before, but I want to be sure that Claude is not like losing context, losing focus on the task that it's now asked to run. And so as you can see here, we have a whole lot of things. There's also presumably hallucinated OpenAI API key, and then llama-ctl deployment's great, which we can proceed by copy, and then we can just like exit from the Claude interactive session, and we can go and deploy and create the deployments. And as you can see, the deployment here, the deployment is here. We have the financial classifier. It's connected to our GitHub repo correctly, and it's now deploying. So the status is now pending for our deployment. So Claude gave us the correct command. Everything is correct. The workflow is deploying, and it will take probably a few more seconds before it goes online. It's a very simple and lightweight workflow, so it shouldn't take that much. So great, as you can see, the workflow is starting to, like the Llama agent is starting to tell us, okay, your record is running, and great. So the status is now running, and so we created, finally, our deployment. So now that we've deployed our workflow as a Llama agent to Llama Cloud Platform, we can now take a look at our agent and see if it's there, and it's there. There's our financial classifier, which we can call through the HTTPS endpoint api.cloud.lamaindex.ai/deployments financial classifier. And obviously, we can call the various endpoints, such as workflows, our workflow name, which is classify/run, which runs the workflows synchronously, and so on. We can basically run the workflow, and we can call it from wherever. So as you can see, with the help of Claude, you can basically create workflows that solve real-world use cases, such as in this case, automated financial documents classification. You can create a LlamaCTL specification. You can basically package them as Llama agents, and you can deploy them to Cloud. And we just wrote a little bit of lines of code. We just had to give Claude a little bit of, I would say, indications, directions, but other than that, Claude acted pretty much on its own, and that's basically the power of the documentation we provided to Claude. Through our tool, vibe-llama, you can download documentation that is specifically tailored for coding agents, and you can produce it in a claude.md file, and obviously you can also download, for example, for Claude, you can also download skills with a brief description of the skill and a wider reference of what the skill does and what are the bigger patterns, I would say, for the skill to follow, for Claude to follow when calling the skill. So that is basically it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope to see you in the next one.